Hello, folks. Sometimes I sit and think about the youth of today. Most of India's population is young today. That's what we hear. And I wonder whether these youngsters across the country, whatever they may be doing or wherever they are, whether they are serious about life, about living, what are their priorities? What do they think about themselves, about the country, about the future of the nation? Do they have any serious thoughts about it? Well, I decided to explore and I called one such youth, Tejas, to the show. Today is Tejas Sridhar show, and I'm recording this after the show is over, after I had talked to him. Now, during this long freewheeling discussion on various subjects, what struck me as remarkable are his thoughts about the nation, the way economic growth is going, about the pandemic, about how the government is dealing with it, about the various policies of the government, and suggestions as to how we can really be Atmanirbhar as a nation, how we can be self reliant and not dependent on various forces, factors, and nations. Now, that really was the takeaway from this interview. And what Tejas said to me really appealed to me, in fact. What To just sum up what he said, uh, he told me that the best way to become Atmanirbhar is to produce for yourself, is to produce things, produce products which are world class in India for Indians. And once you do that, once you give your own people the best, then the world will look at you for providing the best to them. Isn't that a fascinating idea? Of course, it is. So, folks, let's fasten our seatbelts as usual and launch into this fascinating interview, or rather discussion. It's not an interview, it's a discussion with Tejas Sridhar. Okay.
Got it.
So, hi, folks. Today I bring to you a new episode on my YouTube channel. And for today, I have invited a young and vibrant and dynamic guest, Tejas Sridhar. So that's Tejas Sridhar on the screen. You can see he is very young.
Hello.
And let me tell you briefly about him. I have to tell you briefly because if I start talking about him, I think it will take an hour or so. So Tejas Sridhar graduated in the field of management and analytics and has collectively experienced work in Indian and international work cultures. So he has developed a very sound knowledge of marketing, data science, machine learning over this period. And as an advisor for student and startup ventures, he has established a vast network in the entrepreneurial sector and has gained experience in strategic management and leadership. So he has trained under the mentorship of Harvard scholars, and his practical inclination is to lead projects and academically execute them from his voracious readership and polymath versatility. And just to give you a hang of what kind of project he likes to work on, uh, he prefers working on projects aiming at no poverty, good health and well-being, quality education, equality, gender equality, and all many such subjects. In fact, so you can see, his wavelength and his thought process actually. And he also has a company called Paperless Postcard Ventures Private Limited. And to top it
No,
all,
that I was working there actually. That's not.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, he was working there. Okay. So,
Yeah.
and to top this all, he's an artist. He's an independent stand-up comedy artist, and I hope today we'll have a look at that side of Tejas Sridhar also. And he has a vast experience in teaching. Even right now, he's doing some online training about which we will talk later. So that is, in fact, Tejas
Yeah.
Sridhar for you. Have I missed out something, Tejas?
No, that's about it.
Yeah, that's about it.
In fact, that was a really like overstatement of a lot of things that I've done. So
You
you
have
know,
yourself said
it's
so. So I have not overstated it.
yeah, I do, but that is my sales pitch for getting a job.
Okay. No, anyway, from what I know of Tejas, and I've known him for some time now, he's a boy with a lot of gray matter, running loose in his head. And, his interests are absolutely varied. It ranges from his deep interest in religion and Islam in particular. He has done a lot of studies on Islam. I'm right?
Yeah.
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 Okay. And he reads a lot. You have to just look at the library behind him. And if you look at some of the books, they are way beyond his age. So, so today, I have caught hold of Tejas to talk to him about a lot of things. Right now we are,
Yeah.
right in back in the middle of a huge pandemic, and it doesn't seem to be getting better any sooner. So most of us are locked in, and so is Tejas. So he's like a caged tiger now, and I don't know exactly what he's doing, but no, and, he has a lot of thoughts and views on the pandemic itself. Now, the human behavior during the pandemic, how we are behaving globally as Homo sapiens, and we all of us are now talking about the new normal or the new norm. Post the pandemic, after the corona crisis, whenever it happens, we are saying that our lives would be totally changed. Even now, it has changed a lot. So we will talk to Sridhar about his take on these topics, and whatever else comes up. It will be a free wheeling kind of discussion. So, Sridhar, where would you like to take off? What is your take on the pandemic? How, in fact, has it affected you?
So majorly when I take a look at the way things have shaped up, if you were to see the consumer market in general, now since I come from a marketing background, that was the first thing I ever observed when I saw the whole thing. It essentially just moved in from a very hierarchical, where you had the need, want, and demand, where you had that sort of a hierarchy. It's gone from that to a very need driven purchase behavior. And if we take a look at the way brands are supposed to be approached after this, it's going to be very difficult, because in the pandemic, I'm sure a lot of us have gotten accustomed to buying only what we need and restricting ourselves to a great extent. And it's a really great sort of evidence that you can actually survive without a lot of brands and a lot of products. So as a consumer market, of course, we have we are on the brink of innovation. And I say that because now the force and the pressure people put on digital is going to rise. So how do these brands essentially use the digital media? Because of course it's not going to be feasible to have billboards, nobody stepping out. It's not going to be feasible to run ads on TV. People generally don't watch TV these days. It's more on OTT and your Netflix, Amazon, etc. So now it comes down to how effectively brands are able to strategize their social media presence and the way they reach out on the online space. And that is just one of the many perspectives, because that again shapes the way we perceive currency, the way we perceive our propensity to buy something. At the same time, it shapes what we as people prioritize, so to say. That if I have a certain extent of income that is available to me in a disposable manner, what percentage of that do I essentially utilize for what, whether it is durables or fast moving goods or whatever. In that sense, of course, the world is going to see a new reformation, which I hope is a positive one, because it's been you could say that the COVID-19 was essentially a reality check for the capitalists, who used every single event or opportunity they could to sell you something, and suddenly they realized that what, maybe people know what they need, and that's not going to work out all the time.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. But you said that you're looking at the positive side. You say that there will be some positive changes in the entire structure, the global economic structure as such. But don't you feel that there are huge negative aspects of this pandemic also? What with a lot of people having to forego jobs, they have lost their jobs totally, and with no source of income, how do they prioritize their needs? That's an interesting thing. I can prioritize my needs if I have, say, a regular income which I was having, and suddenly now this my income has vanished, kind of. I've lost my job. Now how do I prioritize what exactly I want? And it has become a survivalist kind of situation for me. I either survive or perish. So don't you feel that's a very negative kind of?
It is, but if you take a look at a lot of economic models, like I said, economy has two perspectives. One is from the consumer side and one is from the producer side. Now, brands that I spoke about are essentially producers of goods and services, and we are the consumers, right? Be it airline industry, be it goods, be it food produce, etc. In that sense, what happens is now we have to look at the two values of things that exist for us, and that sort of brings us to the economic value and the utilitarian value. Now, typically, economic value, of course, generally means the actual monetary cost of that thing. So let's say, for example, if it's a ticket, if it's a flight ticket from here to Delhi, it might be roughly around 5K. That's the economic value. The utilitarian value is essentially how much of the opportunity cost is for me to forego that, right? So it is possible that right now, if a sanitizer, for that matter, or the N95 mask, initially those were at a shortage because people had not foreseen this pandemic coming up. Now, at that point, the economic value was a direct function of the utilitarian value, because suddenly you essentially, your life depends on it. So people know you're going to pay anything for it, and they automatically surge all the prices they could. So as people now, when it comes to our priority or our view of, perceiving the world, it sort of changes now, because a lot of utilitarian value has been placed on things we previously didn't think would be, valuable to us. For example, right now, I am certain that people have, to some extent reduced their appetite and their palate. Of course, apart from the people who are baking as a hobby, because a lot of things are not really
but
available.
now I think people have taken off
For
on
someone like me,
cooking and everything. People have started experimenting at home.
And for someone like me who's exactly, for someone like me who's I think 5 days a week I used to have lunch in the office, and suddenly now, because I'm home, I'm getting to eat home food. I have been off caffeine, I have been off a lot of things since March, and it has served a positive side to it as well, because now I know I can live without it. But the other thing that comes into the picture is, how does the government regulate these values? Now, in an ecosystem like ours, when we as people exist inside a sphere that the government has made, the economic values are essentially what the government puts on as taxes and tariffs and manipulates the prices. Right now, they have implemented a GST again on sanitizers as well, which is being frowned upon by a lot of people. But the utilitarian value is how the government proposes to make it available to all of us, make it universal. For example, healthcare was a utilitarian product which was very expensive, but India is running on a model which does not generally have social security in its true meaning. For example, if you were to see the UK where they have NHS or the US where they have government-funded hospitals, India is relatively quite behind in the race when we talk in those terms. Now, in a situation like that, when we talk about the utilitarian value of providing healthcare, the utilitarian value of providing, let's say, a preventive measures or preventive care, right? For example, in India, I'm sure that people don't go to the doctor unless they actually fall sick.
Yeah.
It's only for a sort of cure or healing that. But in a lot of countries in Europe and North America, you will realize that medicine is what is called a preventive approach, which means that, for example, like me, no matter what happens, I make it a point to visit my doctor once a month just to keep my health in check. It is not because I'm sick. Now, the pandemic has put a big spotlight on the fact that people need to make sure this also happens, because a lot of people have had asymptomatic ailments. A lot of people have just found out recently, in lieu of this pandemic, that there are other things which can go wrong. Of course, that and the pressure that has been put on mental health by social media these days, it's all adding up to create a really big reform in the way we as a country perceive healthcare. Suddenly, we have 24-hour helplines being set up for people who go through mental ailments, people who just want to talk. There are helplines for suicidal thoughts, anxiety, etc., etc. In a country where these things were a taboo, or these things were almost a sort of stigma bearers in the past years. So that drastic is just one of the 50 odd things that are essentially shaping up in a better manner. But again, from the government's end, this is from the consumer's end, where I have an open access to preventive healthcare and where I have an access to good mental health. But the problem is, the bigger argument is, what has the government done in return to sort of address these things? Because the way we are handling this pandemic, the way the value of a human life, I'll come to that in a bit, has been dealt with, right? We are essentially undermining what people mean to a particular country. And I think now is the time to actually go the bottom-up approach, where we need to talk about what the country means to people.
Why do you say that?
Majorly because if for example, I just take a control group and an experimental group, and I tell them that, listen, this is the percentage of your income you're going to be giving to the government. My indifference curve. So an indifference curve in economics is essentially how much price I can pay for how much quantity of that product. Now, my indifference curve towards the services and goods provided by the government is going to be higher, right? Because now, every time I go on the street and I see a better infrastructure, see a better management of crowds, see a better health care or insurance provided by the government, my perception of the government improves because I'm seeing a direct, tangible return on the amount of taxes I'm paying. But now, when a lot of people now especially have questioned that, if I'm paying so much of taxes, although only 1% of the country pays taxes, and it is still being used extensively in other places where we can't see it, the tangibility of that return essentially gets questioned. So as a government, when we say that we are increasing our taxes on sanitizers, where we are essentially not able to provide for aid when it comes to pandemics, a lot of people are resorting to social media to talk about how expensive beds have become. Right. So in cases like these, where a person falls sick and he has nothing to turn to, the government is essentially putting a big question mark on what is being returned when we as citizens vest our belief and faith in them in the form of our money. So that is one question that has been raised. And also another perspective to this is that if I was to resort to social security, for example, if I am a critical health worker, in the beginning of March, there were pilots, there were soldiers, there were doctors who are all deployed and who are all at the really, you could say, the contact point of this disease. Now, in cases like this, what is the opportunity cost that they have invested in their study? I need to question that as a country as well. Because if I am saying that I want to introduce, I want to, abolish NEET, and I want to come up with a new concept of NEXT, which is the government saying that there'll be an exit exam after the MBBS also, which will act as an entrance for your post-graduation. Now, in cases like these, where you are already increasing the amount of investment you're putting into these sectors, you need to also make these professions fruitful, because nobody goes into the field of medicine to earn money. That is not something which people go in for. It's essentially service to mankind, right? And if we are not able to secure that profession for those people, if you're not able to secure or incentivize safety and security in the army and the field of aviation and medicine, we are on some level sort of undermining and ridiculing the effort they put into becoming that person. Because if something was to be said about someone who's done a BBA or someone who's done an engineering degree, they very well knew what they are. But a lot of like your UPSC or military, healthcare, these things rely heavily more on the government side as they do on private side. So I think now is essentially a good reform the government can think of is question and understand that, okay, if there is a certain shortage that I'm facing right now, we are falling very short on doctors, we are falling very short on production industries when it comes to pharmaceutical or when it comes to equipment and surgical items. And when it comes to the army, if people are joining in, at a really low cost and people are working on it, I need to make sure I'm minimizing the risk and maximizing the returns.
Yeah.
Whether it is through better pension schemes, whether it is through better, social security, healthcare, non-practicing allowances, that being monitored, right? A lot of studies have been published where they have spoken about why police officers and, generally the third and fourth years of police are resorting to you could say cases as compared to higher up officials. If right, people do that because it's a service and people know if the police, their needs will be met and they're quite satisfied with their job. So it has never been a case where they felt that they needed more and that resorted to leading into corruption or leading into you earning from other sources. So as a country, if we are essentially questioning the fact that, okay, a citizen working as an engineer who's working in a corporate as a coder, sitting at home and is safe, versus a person who has
You got disconnected a bit, I think. Anyway, yeah.
probably. Yeah, so essentially I was talking about how policy or nudge can be used to better make people value their life. And if I decide that I'm not going to practice in private hospitals and practice for the government, that needs to be better incentivized and better secured than something else, because that is essentially what will act as a leverage for people to take up this profession, and we'll be able to meet that demand and supply gap which we have in
Okay,
medicine.
now I have a question here. No, how do you correlate what your thoughts, which you have expressed, with the current
Yeah.
situation? No, how does it become relevant in a situation like what we are facing today?
So there are three perspectives to this. The first one is, from the perspective of a capitalist. When I say that I'm a particular brand and I have certain brand value, the brand value is how much of people or how many consumers I have within my loyalty circle, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Now, in that sense, the cost of one life, okay, becomes how much that person is investing in me. It's called the customer lifetime value. How much he's investing in me throughout his lifetime.
Okay.
Now, in this, the second perspective is, of course, me as an individual. If I have a certain thing I need to resort to, for example, if I have a health checkup once every year. Now, in that sense, if I'm investing this much into my life insurance, I'm investing this much into my health insurance, that is how much I value my life. So my life insurance premium, you could say, is the price tag that I put on my own life.
Yeah. Okay.
And the third is when it comes to the government itself. Because in a government that practices in one of the three manners, where you have communism, dictatorship, and democracy, the life of people is how much you are willing to pay to secure those people and provide them the very basic rights. So essentially here we have to define a baseline where we say that, okay, this qualifies as basic rights. And the moment I'm investing enough to make sure everybody have these, that is the price I'm putting on each person's head.
Okay.
Now, as a government, right now we can actually come to the conclusion that the cost per life in the country is relatively less compared to what it was a year ago. And it's not just one factor which is contributing, it's multiple factors. First of all, there being a shortage of judicial officials, the policemen, because of which the lockdowns are not being able to enforce properly. Second is when it comes to the healthcare professionals, there is a lot of dissonance that is happening there, because people are falling sick. There is a stigma to it. There's a lot that healthcare workers have to deal with. And the last is, of course, what we value. Right now, if you take a look at our geopolitical standing in the world, we are literally being cornered in from all sides with whatever, a nightmare we could imagine of. And a country, and it actually very closely reminds me of the time when Churchill, it's a really cool thing which people like to quote every time, that people in India died of a famine, but Churchill was investing in war. It's really not very different if you take a look at the situation now, because we are heavily focusing on working on the brands, working on companies boycotting Chinese products, companies doing XYZ things to aid in that geopolitical principle, but very little is being done to actually value the life. Because let's say, for example, if it was possible for companies to completely delete all Chinese softwares and apps from their architecture, it's overnight. If that sort of a regulation can be extent of social distancing, a certain extent of medical ESIC acts. In cases like these, why does it take longer for the government to essentially enforce them and audit them? That becomes a crucial question. So is there really a
Tejas, I have
perception
one question for you here.
Yeah.
But do you mean to say
Yeah.
that this the whole app thing, deleting Chinese apps
Yeah.
and doing whatever, you're not in favor of that? It was just I believe that it was just a political kind of signal, a strong signal sent by one country to the other, saying that don't
Yeah.
mess with us, isn't it?
So a lot of people are saying that it is something which is very metaphorical and symbolic, but the way I see it is that, let us say, for example, if people really wanted to earn a lot of money, for example, we have tons of developers in India, we have small scale startups, existing at a stone's throw in places like Bangalore and Hyderabad. Now, in case like this, when we know that this is the extent to which people can provide a supply of tech expertise and tech people, why are we not creating something different well in advance? Because it goes against a lot of beliefs of Adam Smith. But if we could produce these things domestically before and create substitutions to these beforehand, and
no, I think
because he wanted to create.
Tejas, that exactly is the lesson that we seem to have learned today after this pandemic and whatever developments, and that is what the Prime Minister meant by his Atmanirbhar plan, isn't it? That's what he says. Let us not keep depending on people. Let us do it ourselves. Hello.
A country's
yeah.
So when we talk about a country's development indices, to see how well a country is doing, a big part of it is actually given by foreign investments. And as geopolitically unlucky as we are to not be at really peaceful terms with our neighbors, that is pretty much all we can get when we talk about getting foreign investment, because major of those investments happen in really small, regulated and unaudited sectors. For example, your toys which are sold at the signal, right? We don't really know where those come from. We don't know what is the supply chain for it, but those are made in China. Those are Chinese products.
Exactly. Yeah.
So at a time like that, when we say that we are working on a particular campaign or working on a particular idea of becoming self-dependent, we need to also evaluate everything that we are doing internally. Because even an Indian company, for example, if it uses a logistical partner, a logistical vendor to do the supply chain management for them, and they happen to use a software or they happen to use packaging material made by a Chinese company, we are still encouraging China even though we are buying Indian products.
No,
Most
I
of the
agree. I
packaging that
agree.
Amazon
But
packages,
isn't
or
this
Flipkart packages, come from India.
isn't this Atmanirbhar strategy? I think the first step towards what you are trying to say, end to end kind of domestic produce.
Yeah, it is. But then again, we come to the same example, the same thing we talked about before called human life value. Because if I say that I need to, make a country which is self-dependent and has all the resources, I mean, hands down, we can agree that when it comes to automobiles, maybe Germany and Tokyo are the best. When it comes to engineering in the software field, India is the best, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we are brilliant engineers in our IITs all over the world, all over the country, our NITs all over the country, and we are not able to essentially provide enough investment to our own startups in India to give them ample salary, what is their incentive to leave the country and settle abroad? It's merely the fact that I have better companies and better prospects being provided there. There is better healthcare, there's better education. When they settle down there, they say that we have everything in Walmart and Target. Why do we not have that in India, right? So the value of life that you put on one engineer is essentially how much of money you are investing in making his life comfortable in India. And that will determine the extent to which you can be self-sufficient.
No, I think this is the first step towards that. What you're saying is absolutely true, and I think
Yeah.
it will take years for us to achieve a perfect kind of situation where, as you say, the cost of human life of Indians will be
Yeah.
really considered, and will be given the true worth. They will be evaluated on their true values.
Yeah.
But it takes time.
That's true. So
It can't happen overnight.
that's the thing, but also the fact that it's essentially what we have done right now is we've jumped off a cliff without knowing how to build an airplane. So we have to heavily rely on talent, outsourcing, human resources of the country. We have to depend on future education needs.
Oh, that's
We
good.
have to
No?
depend on social
We have
security.
plenty of that. We have plenty of talent. We have plenty
At
of
this point,
workforce.
yeah, but at this point, it is slightly not feasible, I feel.
No, but is
If
it
you were to
possible?
take a look at the way we are
This
planning the pandemic and combating it.
now, this leads me to another question. No, is the world
Yeah.
totally isolated? No, can any country be isolated from the global kind of economics or politics or whatever? And say that we will do everything on our own. We will be independent, and whatever. No, we will end to end. We will manage self-dependence. But can any country afford to be so independent?
Actually, yes, because if you take a look at a country like North Korea, it's a really
Country like
bad
who?
thing to bring it
Country like
up in
what?
this example, but
Which country?
North Korea,
North Korea. Okay.
North Korea,
Uh,
right? So in that sense, what happens is, and the only reason why I believe and the only ideology of North Korea that I follow is that the idea of development, the idea of an economic development has been something which has been set by Western standards. Because if you see the formation of the UN to everything that has happened in the world, it has happened only when the Western countries had reached the peak of their production. When World War II happened, UK was at the peak of production with political standing. US was the leading weapons manufacturer. Russia is the leading nuclear power. Right? In cases like these, what happens is when they say that, okay, I think this is the benchmark I set up, the same thing happened with the nuclear testing and practice. When Pokhran was being tested, it was against the protocol as per the USA because they thought it is against their standing. But what if it would have taken just 2 minutes for India to say, listen, I'm testing it in my own sovereign borders. How is that anything that is affecting anyone else's standing? I say it is for me to ensure my safety, right? The
yeah,
moment
that's what we did,
India did a
isn't it?
nuclear test, it was safer.
Yeah, that's
They
what we
did that,
did.
yes, but that was also still on some level getting the validation of the US, which I feel is one of the biggest flaws in today's idea of development. That we still believe and we still want to please the Westerners with our idea of development, saying, hey, listen, look, I did this, therefore I can tell you my GDP is this much, and they say, okay, you know what, you're a developing country now. So that need for their approval, that need for appeasement when it comes to an economic standing is something we need to let go of. Because it is very easy for India to create a new operating system really quick. It is very easy for us to become leaders in our own fields. For example, if businessmen in India were to let go of the idea of too much of scalability and profit, it would take us 5 minutes to take Maruti Udyog and make it the world's new Volkswagen. Because we have the talent, we have the resources, we just need to start investing more in it. The moment every car in India is a Tata or a Maruti or a Mahindra, we can only then expect it will start reaching a scale where it can be exported also. Because that is when, for example, Germany never actually made Volkswagen or Audi for importing to other countries, for other countries to import them. It was made because they wanted their people to have the best product. Automatically, the world said, you know what, I like this, I'm going to export that. That is how they became leaders in one particular segment. So now if we are looking at becoming leaders in something like FMCG or something like, the automobile sector or the IT sector, it is time we stop driving so much of our resources from outsourcing and offshoring, right? Most of our income in India when it comes to IT is Infosys, Wipro, TCS getting outsourcing and offshoring projects, which is essentially what that, they have the idea, but just because they don't have the brains to do it, we are doing it for them. It's going to take us maybe one presidential cycle or one prime minister tenure to make this completely opposite and say, listen, start supporting each other by creating products, MIS architectures, etc. for yourselves first, right? Then India it's only a matter of time before India comes up with its own computer, right? It starts competing and becomes at scale with Samsung and Apples of the world, and then it slowly gathers that potential. Development never happened when we try to please anyone. Development only happens when you try to please yourself. And at a certain point, when you are happy and satisfied with what you have, the world seeks to get that same thing from you.
Okay.
And that is essentially how I think, in terms of policy and industry, that's how India can, start. Because if we say that, a person in the US is someone very great, okay, when Donald Trump comes to India, the amount of arrangements we make, it is essentially proving the point, and it is essentially telling them that, listen, we value you too much. And that is making them more callous. That is making them more indifferent towards it, right? If the same thing was to be done with India, where we said that, okay, we are investing in social security, we are investing in better education of people, and, doing that system where, if you see the structure of the IAS preparation, the top applicants are sent to LBS, NAA, and the education is paid for by the government, right? Because that essentially puts a liability to the citizens towards the government. And that sense just does not hold up anywhere else, because when we see a government medical college, we just think that, okay, I'm still paying a fee and it is not something great, right? I'm just doing it because it's cheap. But what if governments were able to outperform the private colleges in the amount of facilities they could provide, and in being at pace with the medical developments all over the world? And we could invest more in our domestic research when it comes to such vaccines, such medicines, right? We at one point, gradually, with changes in policy, it's going to take us maximum of 5 years to at least get 20% there.
Yeah, I agree.
And this happens when we try to satisfy our people.
Yeah, I agree. And we have come a long way since 1947. I think we still have a very long way to go. And yes, the countries have to change. Our country in particular has to change itself, according to the situations that exist and which may come up. And let's hope that we get a good kind of leadership from whoever is at the helm of the
That's true,
affairs.
certainly.
Because leadership matters. It's a matter of will, vision and will, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, let's now not talk, finish off our serious discussions and talk a bit about you. What exactly are you doing these days? How do you keep yourself busy and alive in this lockdown state?
I have been working on, teaching data science to a couple of MBA students. I work on that. I work on generally teaching for preparation exams as well. And in the meantime, I'm also reading up research papers and coming up with things I can work on myself, because I'm an aspirant of public policy. So after this, when I go forward in life, that is my aim to go for. That is what I want to, and for that reason, I'm essentially sitting and improving up with better solutions, better problem statements, and seeing and hoping positively that this year goes by and I can actually continue the way I was planned.
Oh, great. And what about your hobbies? What hobbies are you pursuing?
Well, you do know that I write. I still continue. I still do write sometimes when I'm really in the mood for it. Apart from that, I haven't had the time to sort of accommodate a lot of hobbies lately. But majorly, that's what I do. I write, and I write content now. I sing sometimes. I have been working on a new venture of mine, which is using my experience with writing and all of that to come up with a new content platform. So fingers crossed that comes out soon too.
And you are writing a book also, I believe.
Yeah, I'm writing a book, sort of summarizing and talking about my experiences working with people, meeting people, and how I learned a lot of things outside of college. Because if you are aware that I have been traveling a lot in the last 2-3 years, going around and meeting new people, coming up with new projects, and seeing the world from a different perspective. It's really put my problems at the back seat, because for someone who was living with the Indian privilege, I thought my biggest problem was the fact that our Indian education system or our Indian political system is flawed. But when I realized the kind of problems that happen abroad, I have really been grounded to understand that okay, there is much worse happening, and there are other people who need me more than I thought. So definitely, it's one thing to sit in the comfort of a house and speculate what the problem is versus seeing it firsthand. And once you see it firsthand, you realize what your calling is, and you feel that it's really not fair and just for you to sit in this comfortable place and let the world be that way.
Good. And given your talent for stand-up comedy, can you quickly do something for
Yeah.
our audience? Some make them laugh, kind of do something.
Sure. So I have been working on a little part which I have been writing for a while now. It's so this part is untested. I used to do open mics where I used to get feedback on what I write, but since there has not been much, I have not gotten feedback on this. But it essentially talks about the Indian middle class family.
Okay.
And so the idea is that people are middle class than they wish to admit. And the thing is, middle class mindset does not just come with the way we live with things. For example, I am a really good fan of poetry. So I really love going to those events where people read poetry and people discuss existing poets and works. And even when I go there, you're middle class when you're sitting there and you're thinking that अच्छा ये कोई बंदा है जो इसको professionally करता है. That sort of speaks, because you may be very liberal in your house where you're saying that पापा मुझे ये करना है, मैं यही करूंगा as a profession, but still you subtly judge someone when you hear this person is doing poetry. It's not so. I've been working on that. It's a very untested script yet. So I don't know if it will go well. And apart from that, I also wrote a little bit about relationships, which has been a topic which I've been writing on since ages. And so that talks about how a perception of a relationship is different in two cases. For example, as a boy, if I was to get into a relationship, for me it is quite simple. It is that okay, I see my future with this person, and we are together. That's about it. And as a man, there is very little I can do to express myself, because that is the way men are. You know, we find it difficult to express it. So the same thing, if you were to see the passion with which a man hammers a nail into a wall versus the passion with which he maybe assists his wife in cooking, it's way different. But I was recently talking to a friend of mine who just recently, became a mother. And I was asking her, what is it like to be in a house with two men? And her response was, you know, seeing my kid grow up, I now realize why my husband is the way he is. So for women, a relationship is essentially just, being a therapist, being a sort of mentor to person, and saying that a woman is fully evolved, and next to her is this really barbaric little animal which is learning to evolve. You know, it's very violent with whatever it has to do. For example, if this guy cannot express himself, he will start getting angry and violent. He needs constant approval. He needs constant attention. And it's actually fascinating to watch the dynamic between a fully evolved gender and a gender which is still figuring its way out. You know, there are still many things that we don't know about women, and people think that's because women are complicated. But the fact is, they are more evolved. And one of the simplest examples I've had is this one time I was going out with a couple of friends, and we were driving to Pune on a rented car, and it was rented on my name. So I, being a middle class person, I didn't buy insurance, because I said, you know what, I'm confident I will not wreck it. It's fine. Why should I pay 1,500 bucks extra for that? So then we are driving, and in the middle of the road, between Thane and Pune, she says, you know what, now I'll drive. There are three people in the car who are men, and all men were genuinely equally scared, right? But we are like, okay, you know what? It's fine. Go ahead, drive it. Now, we are very possessive about the things we do. For example, with men, when it comes to sports, we don't even like flinching or changing the channel. So you can imagine how we feel about a car as a whole, right? So we are going in the middle of the street, and some distance away, we come across another car which has a sign that says "baby on board." And in terms of a normal person's psychology, it means that the person will start driving slowly because there's a baby and that it needs to be careful, right? But not a woman, because we forgot that we have a woman on the steering wheel here. So she pulls up 10 feet from the car, and the baby peeps. And while this girl is just sitting there observing the baby, and the baby is getting happy, three of us are praying for our lives, because we know what a woman is when she comes that close to a baby, right? So we're just going, and she's tailing the car, and the baby is looking at her. She's smiling at it. They are waving at each other, and the baby just plops back. She goes, oh, but she forgot that she's holding a steering wheel. So we were off road for a whole 4 minutes. So that's been a gig I've been working on. So I hope that was still as good as it was once.
Oh, great. What was the other script you said?
I'm still writing it. It's a work in progress, where I'm talking about the battle of the two genders, how evolved they are, how different their perceptions are, and such. So I think once it's done, maybe it'll be done in another month or so. I'll be able to perform it openly for feedback. Maybe then we can connect.
Yeah, we should do it sometime here, because that's really fun. In these sad and depressed days, I think we need a bit of laughter and sunshine in our lives.
That's true, yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So anything else, Tejas, you want to express?
No, I think we had a really fruitful discussion. It's been great. I hope there are some new perspectives which come up after watching this video from people as to how the economics of this thing has to be dealt with, and what my perceptions were, so that I can probably evolve myself better and get to know another person's standing.
Yeah, and we'll do more shows. I think we need to work on other topics also. Let's do that. Thanks for joining, Tejas. I hope the audience enjoys it. And let's hope we got the recording right here. Because there was a lot of
yeah, that's true.
cracking and crackling in between.
Right.
So anyway, thanks.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks, Tejas.
Most welcome. Thank you for having me. It was an absolute honor, and looking forward to connecting again.
Yeah, sure. Bye.
Bye.